up, fam? Welcome to Living For You, the YouTube channel. It's me, your favorite brother, your favorite cousin, your favorite uncle, your favorite father, your best friend's best friend, Dr. Larry Smith. And once again, welcome to the Living For You YouTube channel. You guys know when you come here, it's a safe space, it's a positive place, it's a place for us to come together and grow. Not just you grow from what I say, but I grow from us sharing and interacting and doing all the things that we do here at this positive place called Living For You, the YouTube channel. For those of you who are new, I'm Dr. Larry Smith. You can get as much information as you want about me on www.livingforyoucoaching.com. Once again, that's www.livingforyoucoaching.com. So make sure you go out there. It should be blaring across the screen at this point. You can also follow me on social media at Dr. Larry Smith on Instagram and on Facebook. You can email me at Dr. Larry at Live For You Coaching. There's a lot of ways to get in contact with me if you want to sign up for coaching, if you want me to do some work with you, if you want to tell me a little bit about yourself and grow as a person. I am here for you to get those services that you need. So reach out to me. Also, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and you hit the notification bells. Subscribe, so that you know when I drop content, which is pretty often, and so that you're aware and you get to watch and participate in this fabulous content that we're putting out here up on this channel. So go ahead and do that. And then also like the videos, share the videos. All of that helps for this stuff to be more and more in the YouTube algorithm, so that you're the first to see when things come up, and we can share this with other people, and we can grow this channel from over 1,000 to hopefully over 1 million one day. That is the goal, that is the hope, that is not the reason why I do this. I do this because I love it. I love you guys and I enjoy what I do. But you know, it's just more rewarding when you can share it with more people. You know what I'm saying? So go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and do all of that stuff. And leave comments if you want to as well, suggestions or whatever. So anyway, this is my Married to Medicine video. You guys know, generally I do life coaching things and talk about different subjects and topics as it relates to your mental, spiritual, and your mind wellness and whatnot. But I also do things related to entertainment content. In fact, last time I started doing the video reviews from a coach's perspective of A Yana Fix My Life, and those were some of my highest viewed and highest shared and highest liked and commented on videos. And so I figured that you guys like that aspect, so I decided to make that more of a permanent stay on this channel, whereas I pick shows or I pick a show and I look at each episode from a life coaching perspective. You can get that you can get the recap and all the other stuff from a lot of other vloggers, some of which I watch, Funky Deneva, DJ Richie Sky, Bonnie Blue. There's like a lot of them that are out there. The Binge-worthy, there's a lot of them that are out there, and they're excellent and fabulous. So if you want a review per se from that perspective, those are great channels to go and watch. And I tend to watch them after I record my videos, because I don't want to be jilted or jaded in my mind as I'm talking about it from a life coach's perspective. And that's what you'll get here. You'll get me diving into it, dissecting and analyzing it from a life coach's perspective and my input on that from my vantage point and from my expertise as a life and spiritual coach. Nevertheless, I know this episode that I'm talking about today is Season 8, Married to Medicine, Episode 1. And I know it aired last week, but I needed the time to do the research, to watch the episode a couple of times, and to just kind of build up what I want to talk about and how I want to go with it. So that's why I'm releasing it today, and I may do the same thing next week, release the episode that premieres Sunday to, you know, a week later, so that you guys kind of can get my take on it as I go and as I watch it, because I'm doing more than just watching and observing and giving an opinion. I'm watching, observing for certain specific things, and then of course I do other research to corroborate and to collaborate with what I'm talking about. So just be patient. It's coming. You're going to get your videos. You're going to get your weekly review of Married to Medicine and whatever other shows we do from a life coach's perspective. All right, so let's just get into it, right? Let's just start to talk about the episode and what we've seen. It was the first episode of the season. And so, you know, with this show being so centered around majority African American doctors, it's going to have to touch on some of the subjects that we've been dealing with and been going through this last year or so over this time period. So obviously it's a doctor show, so you're married to medicine. So the blaring conversation that's going to really follow throughout the entire conversation is going to be about the pandemic. We've been dealing with this pandemic. We've been living. Now, I won't say dealing. We've been working our way through this pandemic, and we've been successfully, hopefully, working our way through this pandemic all year and plus, right? And so them being doctors, obviously, throughout the episode, you're going to see that they're very conscious and very aware and very educated, as well as mindful of the pandemic in many, many ways. It would just be an irresponsibility of their Hippocratic oath, the oath that doctors take, and an irresponsibility to their licenses and to their professions to not address a pandemic, which is something that is major in their lives, practicing medicine, as we see through this first episode, but also just it's their profession, right? It only makes sense. But another part of the episode that I think is more so specific because these are African American doctors is the whole situation of racial injustice, the protests, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Aubrey Autry, and all of the other stuff that we saw going on during last year and all this during this pandemic, which needed attention. And I'm so glad when I see shows like this and Housewives and Basketball Wives and other things. I'm so glad when I see them address important topics, because we can live in a fantasy world and act like these things don't exist around us. We can live in a fantasy world and act like these things don't impact us in any kind of way. But remember, that's a fantasy world, because they do. We're all impacted. And me being a man of color, a black man, and me being a life coach and dealing with clients who also deal with similar situations that I deal with, it's part of my profession to know, in my business, to feel. And it's okay to feel. So I'm glad that these shows are addressing these things. And so they talk about things and how it's impacted them, and how with the George Floyd situation specifically, we saw that. We watched that. We experienced that. And as George Floyd pleaded for his mother and his life was being taken from him and his oxygen was being depleted, we kind of felt that same level of oxygen depletion in our spirits on a countrywide, global-wide phenomenon. And so it pulled Americans who generally wouldn't have the experience of such a treatment by police officers as I have, and as any other black man would tell you we have. And it's not to say any other group does not experience that, but this is a common phenomenon that as a black male we have to be prepared for by our parents in order to successfully make it home from the police, those who are supposed to serve and protect us from the bad guys. But when the police become the bad guys, that's a big issue in itself, right? And so a lot of the doctors that they talked about that experience being exposed to more people than those who just experience it often, sometimes on a daily basis. So that was a good thing. So you following all of them through, you find out many things. You find out that Dr. Damon decides to, instead of being victimized by this, I'm going to take the entire situation between Black Lives Matter and the pandemic, and I'm going to use it to my benefit and do something for the people. And I love that. I'm the type of person who believes that even if it seems to be a negative thing on you or a negative life lesson that might have hurt you, I believe that everything can be spun into a positive and can be used for the betterment and the building up of the world. And I believe that that is our obligation when we go through stuff, to do that, to build up the world. And so I thought it was phenomenal that he was specifically targeting the black community, trying to get people out to get tested for COVID, because we know that this pandemic has hit disenfranchised communities, and the black community is a disenfranchised community, generally tested. He also talked about going into poorer neighborhoods and disadvantaged neighborhoods and doing testing. That is a phenomenal, powerful, wonderful thing. But it is also the plight of those of us who are professional and black, right? Professional and African descendant or African American. That is our plight. That when we become professions, part of what we have to do is look backwards to try to help those who are not as fortunate as us to have gone to college, those who are not as fortunate as us who have started businesses, mega businesses, and be successful. Those of us who don't have those things or have access to those things, we kind of have a moral, racial, community obligation to go back and uplift those things. And I am honored to be a professional who does that. And I'm sure Dr. Damon and others are honored to have the ability to do that and go back and do it. So I loved it. It just gave me goosebumps because I know it's my story, it's my plight, but I honorably take it and love it and live with it all the time. So we saw that, and he got a few of the doctors out. Heavenly was out there with them, and Dr. Jackie was out there with them. And then they get into this conversation about Dr. Jackie and Simone's relationship. Now, mind you, they mentioned this in the episode. There's always in your group of circle, sphere of friends, a foundational relationship. The relationship that keeps all of the pieces together, that if this relationship fell apart, everything falls apart. And it seems like everybody wants to feel like that friend, but generally you find out you're not that friend if your relationship falls apart and the relationships of everybody else still goes on and on. But you find out that Dr. Jackie and Simone's relationship, according to everybody else, is the foundational anchor for all of these groups of friends. And that just makes sense. They've been friends for years. I think Dr. Jackie said it was between 23 and 25 years. They had a long-term friendship, and so for them to fall out makes it even harder for the other women to be able to come together. But what it seemed to me was that both Dr. Jackie and Dr. Jackie and Dr. Simone were being quite childish and selfish. I'm not going to talk to you because you're not talking to me. And if you're not talking to me, I'm not going to talk to you. Well, guess what? In order to resolve conflict, somebody has to step up and say, hey, let's resolve this. Hey, let's talk about where we are. Hey, let's move on. But what it seems like from listening to Dr. Jackie saying she was always the one doing that, and it seems like Dr. Simone didn't care. And Dr. Simone looking at Dr. Jackie and thinking she doesn't care or she has nothing to say. They just both ignoring each other and speak in passing, and it's awkward and it's weird, but it also makes it awkward and weird for everybody around them. So you got that whole situation. And in the midst of that is Dr. Heavenly. Dr. Heavenly is an interesting person in this show because with Heavenly, you either like her or you don't. And the reason why people like her or they don't is because she's very blunt. She's very direct. People have a strong either appreciation for the blunt person or they don't. And how do I know that? Because I'm considered the blunt person in my sphere. I'm generally a blunt person in just speaking. I'm very honest and upfront. I do it respectful about 90% of the time, but then there's an other 10% where it just comes out however it comes into my brain sometimes. I know, I work on that. That is one of my opportunities for growth. So, in some ways. But people generally appreciate it, but then there are those who don't. And so Dr. Heavenly represents that kind of situation in the midst of it. And so she's befriended Dr. Jackie, and it seems as though Dr. Simone has a little bit of jealousy of her friend of 23 to 25 years befriending Dr. Heavenly, someone who she felt offended by and didn't think it was right. And Dr. Jackie feels like when Buffy, who was on last season, and I've been watching this show all 8 seasons, so I know the people as far as what I see on TV. But Buffy was accusing Dr. Jackie of being insensitive when she brought up her inability to have a child publicly, even though Dr. Jackie felt it was though she was sharing her story. You know, it kind of was an insensitive moment, and Dr. Jackie really didn't get it, and I still don't think she got it fully even now, but that's last season. But she felt as though Dr. Simone didn't step in to be her friend and kind of get on her team against what Buffy was saying about her. And it just made for an interesting little tidbit riff. But Dr. Heavenly and Jackie became close friends in turn because Heavenly stood up for Jackie. And that became more contention in their relationship. Now, we did start the episode out with them in New York at the reunion, making up, saying they were going to go from this point on, things were going to be better because they're best friends, and it's going to, they're going to work on building their relationship back to where it was. That never happened. Not fully. Not fully. And so then we go to Dr. Eugene and Toya. Toya lives in this world in which it seems like everything revolves around her. Now let's put some of these things into context too from a zodiological perspective. When I talked about Dr. Jackie and Dr. Simone's relationship, you have a Leo, stubborn Leo, and you have a Pisces who sees worlds through their emotions. Both are emotional signs, Both are kind of, the Pisces thinks up the world in themselves, and the Leo is pretty stubborn, so that's why they're not connecting. And then when you toss in the Scorpio, the stinger, and the emotional stinger of Dr. Heavenly, that creates an atmosphere. So just keep those zoological thoughts in mind. And I did my research, and so this is how I know their signs. So you also then, like I said, you go to Toya, who's an Aries, who acts out of an Aryan kind of childish, kind of immature mentality. She's not thinking about this pandemic in a serious way. She's like, I just want to have fun. I just want to make money. I just want to have money. I want to spend money. I want to live this great, fabulous life. And the pandemic stopped my fabulous life. God forbid a pandemic happens, something horrible happened, and the worst thing you can say about it is that it's impacting your anniversary trip overseas. But typical Aryan, typical Toya personality traits, right? And Dr. Eugene, who is beat down, working hard just as every other doctor has been in this situation, he is trying to get her to see reason, and she's seeing it on a different path. But that's been their story since forever. Toya has been the one who's kind of been taking advantage of everything while Eugene's working to make sure everything's taken care of. It's a very interesting relationship dynamic that they got there going on. Similarly, pandemic-wise, Dr. Jackie and her husband Curtis, they're doing very well, trying to make it through the pandemic and be healthy and be health conscious and all those stuff. And they finished their home decorations, which could have been a burden during this pandemic, but they finished it before the pandemic, and it's not decorated, but they're there. And so you can kind of see that their relationship is growing beyond, because they had an infidelity situation that came up a couple of seasons ago, and now they're trying to grow back together, and I can see that. Scott and Contessa was interesting. We know from some of the clips that they're going to have issues, marital issues. But I found what I like about Scott and Contessa is they seem very open-minded to life. They seem very much willing to try different things. Looking up Contessa's birthday, I find out she's a Gemini, like myself. And we tend to be malleable. We tend to be mutual. We tend to be able to just go with the flow as things are going. And so when I see things like Scott's niece and her girlfriend living with Contessa to take care of the kids, and the niece is kind of new agey. She's into African spirituality. She's into yoga and Zen and different medicines and different treatments. And Scott and Contessa are like, well, hey, if it works, it works. That is a complete Gemini open-minded thing to say, especially when you talk about the sexuality component of it and everything. So there is a level of openness, and I think it's great because it's going to allow her children to have a bigger experience in life. And then, of course, you see Dr. Simone and her husband Cecil working things together as they generally do. Their youngest son is now going to college, and I found it interesting that he was kind of worried about having to deal with racism when he go off to college, and that he's going to have to, because he's going to a small community school, I think Lee University, which is in a little part of Tennessee, where he had saw Confederate flags, and he knew that it was going to be that kind of environment. And coming from Atlanta, and he pointed this out so eloquently, because I think a lot of people don't really get this, but it's a fact. Atlanta is kind of somewhat of a black mecca of a city in which black people, we were able to experience different facets of blackness, from poverty to extreme wealth and everything in between. And we're able to interact daily with those people and see this daily. So you're not questioning your capabilities. You're not questioning your status. You're not questioning who you are as a proud person of color. As a proud black man, you're just kind of existing. And I lived there for 10 years. And so that was my experience. Atlanta gave me more black pride than I had ever gotten out in my entire life. And it's deeply influenced who I am as a person. So we see that dynamic, the mother-son dynamic. I love the open communication and the willingness to have that conversation. See, what we're seeing here is something we generally don't see. I know I didn't see this much growing up. A black family on all of the levels, and many of these families on this show, of a healthy experience of parenting and a healthy experience of trying to manage through relationships, life, and career. And that is one of the reasons why I appreciate and honor Married to Medicine, because it shows the black professional but it also shows strong Black family bonds and friendship bonds that aren't always perfect, that sometimes need repair, where people have flaws, but we're learning to deal and grow and cope and be better people than we were before or the day before. So yeah, so the season to me is starting off great. There's a lot of things at the end of the episode. Toya being the immature Aries, or being the fire sign, the fire in the sign, she pops off and she gets to arguing with Heavenly and pretty much everybody. She's kind of against everybody. And what I learned at that party is really everybody except for maybe Contessa went there on the defense, and they acted out of that defense as expected. Simone and Jackie quiet down, went stoic, and I think a lot of that also has to do with not only their signs of being Leo and Pisces, but also being doctors and going through med school. Earning a doctorate myself, I know that you're used to looking at information, so much information, and not really giving an opinion or an emotion to that information. And so you develop kind of a stoic sense of being in which you don't respond emotionally to everything, or you don't respond emotionally to, in the same way that a person who just flies off the emotions. You kind of learn to have to be that way to be a successful doctor, whether it's a PhD or an MD. But I would even say it would be more to be an MD to learn to have a non-interactional, emotionally stoic personality. And so you kind of see that at play. But all of this stuff is at play. And I think the season's off to a great start. As with the drama, those of you who like the drama, it's going to be there. But I also think that you're kind of getting a chance to see from a coach's perspective different personalities interacting on the physical level personality, the kind of the communication, life-centered version of it. But then there are some underlying spiritual aspects there too. Like I said, the zodiological signs, the personality, emotional traits, things that can't be grabbed but can definitely be felt through this season of Married to Medicine. Just one last interesting note I thought about the episode. I thought it was interesting that the new lady, Anila, I think that's her name, I think Toya said she was an Aries, so I'm expecting Aryan energy from her, kind of similar to Toya's, especially since they're friends. Another part of the Aryan energy that I have seen in her is she's already butting her head into business that ain't got nothing to do with her, making comments about things that ain't got nothing to do with her, that she wasn't there for. That's a very immature, childlike thing, but it's very typical of Aries, who have fire in their belly and fire in their souls to get involved in things that ain't got nothing to do with them from a passionate level. So this should be a very interesting season. We'll see how she mingles and weaves her way into this situation as it relates to all of the other stuff that's going on with the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and the protests and all these things going on, how she's going to interact with this group of Black friends and their husbands and their children being a non-Black person, a person of color, but not a Black person, and that's completely different. Now, she is in Atlanta, so she interacts with Black people all day long, but it should be interesting how that plays out within this group and sphere of friends, because we know how that played out with Carrie, who was on there seasons ago, and who I think is going to show up again this season. It's a lot, and I'm trying to do it in such an under time, but when you get to talking about these things, you kind of go on and on and on and on. So I hope this gives you my perspective on different things. As a life coach, as a spiritual coach, I'm going to point out things that you might not look at from the surface level, and to try to understand it on a deeper level. Because like I said, for example, Toya and her desire for wealth and desire for the image, that says a lot about her, because that's always been her storyline, and I wonder what's behind that. Did she grow up in poverty in Detroit? I think she did. Either way, it's a discussion worth having. So feel free to leave comments, feel free to discuss, feel free to share, and give suggestions on perhaps what aspects you'd like to see from a life coach's perspective talked about on Married to Medicine, or other shows that you think might be interesting that I can catch from the beginning of the season, so I can kind of keep it going on. Anyway, I've talked and I've talked and I've talked. I hope you enjoyed this this episode of Living for You. As I always say in my videos, I love you guys. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media. Let's grow. Let's build the dialogue. And as I always say, I love you and look forward to seeing you in the next video.